Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot, and in this video I'm going to explain to you how we decide if we are going to do a step climb in the Boeing 737. Now, the 737 as a short to medium haul aircraft is one in which you do not do step climbs as often as in, for example, long haul aircraft. And for that reason there will be a separate video at some point in the future on how we do it in the long-haul sector of aviation. However, this one is purely based on the Boeing 737. Now, we've just about started cruising at flight level 350 over here. We are burning some fuel and we now start reaching a point where, looking into the FMC, the optimum level is coming very close to the next higher available flight level. We're cruising at 350 and 370, as you can see, is just about the optimum now, so we should consider if we want to do a step climb or not. Now, before we go into exactly how we go along considering a step climb, let's quickly have a look into what the flight crew training manual of the Boeing 737 says. Flight plans not constrained by short trip distance are typically based on conducting the cruise portion of the flight close to optimum altitude. Since the optimum altitude increases as fuel is consumed during the flight, it is necessary to climb to a higher cruise altitude periodically to achieve the flight plan fuel burn. This technique, referred to as step climb cruise, is typically accomplished by entering an appropriate step climb value in the FMC according to the available cruise levels. For most flights, one or more step climbs may be required before reaching the top of descent. It may be especially advantageous to request an initial cruise altitude above optimum if altitude changes are difficult to obtain on specific routes. This minimizes the possibility of being held at a low altitude high fuel consumption condition for long periods of time. The requested accepted initial cruise altitude should be compared to the thrust limited or the maneuver margin limited altitudes. Remember, a cruise thrust limited altitude is dependent upon the cruise level temperature. If the cruise level temperature increases above the chart value for gross weight, maximum cruise thrust will not maintain desired cruising speed. Optimum step points are a function of the route length, flight conditions, speed mode, present altitude, step to altitude, and gross weight. The FMC does not compute an optimum step point. The crew must enter a step to altitude. The FMC then computes the estimated time of arrival and distance to the step climb point based upon gross weight. A fuel saving or penalty to destination is computed assuming the step climb is performed. Initiate a cruise climb to the new altitude as close as practicable to the step climb point. The additional fuel required for a 4,000 foot en route climb varies from 300 to 500 pounds of fuel, which is 135 to 225 kilograms, depending on the airplane gross weight, initial altitude, air temperature, and climb speed. The fuel increment is largest for high gross weights and low initial altitudes. Additional fuel burn is offset by fuel savings in the descent. It is usually beneficial to climb to a higher altitude if recommended by the FMC or the flight plan, provided the wind information used is reliable. So that is the theory from the Boeing Flight Crew Training Manual. Do note, the fuel saved at higher altitude does not normally justify a step climb unless the cruise time of the higher altitude is approximately 20 minutes or longer. So we can say that if we spend 20 minutes or more at the new cruising level, then usually we will start saving some fuel. Now, let's have a look into a little bit more information on how we would practically decide if we are going to perform the step climb or not. So, we are going to start by looking at the information we have readily available right within the flight deck. And obviously the first point where we are going to start is going to be the flight management computer. And we just had a look at that already. We can see that we have a cruise altitude of flight level 350, an optimum of 370, and a maximum of flight level 385. The distance to the top of descent is 818 nautical miles, which means that we are not restricted by the length of the sector. Remember, we are looking for at least 20 minutes of cruise, so that means the time to the top of descent should be at least roughly 25 minutes If it is any shorter than that, the step climb is not worth it. So have a look over here, top of descent 11:56, the current time 10:12, in other words it is more than 25 minutes. Quite obviously on this flight, but do take it into account on shorter sectors as well. At this point, it is also very recommendable, if you have any experience on the route that you are flying, to remember, when will ATC typically give you a descent? Now, if you are not familiar with the airspace that you're flying through, then you cannot take this into account and you have to decide without that information. But in many cases you will be familiar with the routes that you are flying, and therefore you will know if air traffic control tends to give you early descents, and you can take that into your decision-making process. Now, the other piece of information that we want to have a look at is the turbulence at the new cruising level. So, climbing to an altitude at or above the optimum in the 737 is going to give you a very narrow speed margin. I've covered that in my previous video on how to decide on the initial cruising altitude, and it is likewise important for the step climb. So, for more detailed information on that, I recommend a look into the video on how to decide on the initial cruising altitude. I'm going to keep those explanations in this video, therefore rather brief. So, if you climb to the optimum or even higher, then you are going to have very narrow margins, typically within 10 knots above and below your current airspeed. And if you enter any sort of turbulence, that might get down southbound very quickly in the 737. So the 737 is a plane that does not have a lot of margin in cruise, therefore make your decision carefully if you want to climb up higher. Ask air traffic control if they have any turbulence reports, or have a look at the flight plan. Check the maximum shear value that you can find on the route portion of the flights. That is, if you're using the flight plan layout that I'm currently using, which is the Ryanair layout, then you can find that on the top of the route section over here, maximum shear value 5, and then if you go down a little bit, you will basically find a shear value for every single waypoint along your flight. So you can see here at Olno it is 1, at Arki it is 1, and then as we cruise along you can see it coming up to 2 over here at MGOT, and so on. Over here at Budex it's going up to 4, so looking at the flight plan, we're currently in Mount Enita, so we might as well have a look there already. And Enita up here is 2, we can see it's going up, so chances are it might get a little bit more turbulent. However, the shear factor is the number that may or may not indicate something, so it is not 100% reliable. The next thing for you to take into account is what the FMC calculates. So let's enter flight level 370 as a step altitude in the FMC. Do note that the FMC is a rather dumb computer, so the step point that is calculated up here, as outlined in the flight crew training manual, is not the most optimal step point. It basically is the point where the airplane can climb to the level that you've indicated. So, easily said, once their optimum is close enough to the step altitude, it is going to command a step climb. It will not take into account, for example, changes in the wind speed and direction, which might very well have a big impact on your flight. So, with that information available, how do we decide then if we are going to conduct a step climb or not? Well, in order to review that, let's have a look into the flight plan once again and have a look into the wind data block. If we go down here, then let's pick the waypoint where we are currently flying towards, which, as you can see on top of the screen, is Enita. And looking at the winds over here at Enita, in flight level 350 the forecast is 345 at 12. Looking at the navigation display, we're 344 at 12, so it is a pretty accurate forecast. If we climbed to a higher level, the wind would shift 15 degrees to the right and lose a knot of speed. In other words, if we look at our navigation display right now, we would actually see that the tailwind component would decrease if we conduct the step climb. For that reason, we would be flying slower, and that puts in question if the step climb is worth it or not. Now, at this point, one pilot will tell you this, the other pilot will tell you that. What I can tell you is the following. Climbing to a higher altitude is not going to have a huge effect on the fuel flow. If we have a look into the present calculations of the FMC, we can see that we are going to save 3.4%. Now, looking at the progress page, we are going to burn roughly 4.4 tons of fuel, so 3% of that is somewhere in the region of 100 kilograms of fuel. Now, the change in wind that we're expecting on this particular flight is not going to be extreme, so it is only going to be a few knots. In other words, even though we are going to lose a little bit of our tailwind component if we conduct the step climb, the effect on the ground speed is not going to be too great. Therefore, the effect the wind would have on the step climb is not really an indicator that would constrain us on this particular flight that we are doing right now. But if you were to lose a tailwind component of 5 knots or greater, I would consider delaying the step climb until you either have a much higher optimum level or until the difference in the tailwind component is not too great anymore. In many cases, when you're flying close to an areas where you have a jet stream or a strong wind component overall, chances are that your wind speed is going to decrease as you increase your altitude. Therefore, take into account, if it's a headwind, it might be a good thing, but if it's a tailwind, you might want to consider staying at a lower altitude to benefit of the additional tailwind component. Now, with all of that taken into consideration, we can now make our decision if we want to perform the step climb or not. In our case, let's say, yes, we want to perform the step climb. And the reason why is because we have those 3.1% savings, and as we calculated earlier, that equals roughly 100 kilograms of fuel on this flight. We have taken into consideration the moment when we have to leave our flight level again, and we have taken into consideration the amount of the wind component. Now, with all things basically considered, the last thing we are worrying about is turbulence. Now, in most cases, when there is some sort of turbulence reported, be it through the shear factor or be it through the significant weather chart, we will have to make a decision. And when there is some sort of turbulence reported, my personal recommendation is ask air traffic control if they have anybody along your route if they experience any turbulence. If the answer is no, do the step climb. If the answer is yes, stay where you currently are if it's smooth. The little bit of saving in the fuel that you will gain from the step climb, which in many occasions is only like 20 or 30 kilograms, is not going to be worth the additional discomfort that you are going to encounter for the passengers. Now you will ask yourself, well, but if you're saying that on most flights you are only going to save some 20 or 30 kilograms, then why should I perform a step climb after all? After all, that will not be noticed at all, will it? Well, that might be true for the single flight that you are currently executing. However, think of an airline that has 3,000 flights a day. If every single one of those flights would save maybe 30 kilograms of fuel times 3,000, that would be 90 tons of fuel saved on that single day. Now 90 tons is a huge lot of fuel that you are going to save, taking into consideration that the price for jet fuel at the moment is roughly 1 kilogram costs $1. So you might save your airline $90,000 there if you are going to perform your step climb and all of your colleagues do it as well. And that is on every single day. Alright, now everything considered, we can go ahead and plan our step climb. So obviously we would request it from air traffic control, and they are either going to grant the step climb or not. If they don't give it to you, well, ask again with the next sector. If they do give it to you, the correct way how to execute a step climb in the Boeing 737 is by dialing in the new altitude in the mode control panel, like so, and then press altitude intervent. That is going to update the FMC with the new cruising level. And do note a little glitch of the real-life Boeing FMC, which PMDG have simulated over here, The thing is going to fix the target speed that you had at the earlier cruising level, and you will have to press the econ button once again and execute that in order for the airplane to continue flying at the most optimal speed for the new predicted flight level. Also, you will have to update the cabin pressurization panel with the new cruising altitude. That is going to be it for this video. I hope you found this one interesting. As said, I am going to do a separate video once I am actively flying the Airbus A330 that I am going to transition on in the sooner future, and I am going to outline some differences there between the considerations we are taking on a long-haul flight on an Airbus compared to the short to medium hauls that we are doing in the Boeing 737 over here. In any case, I would like to thank you very much for watching. Hope you found this one interesting. If you did, then do let me know in the comments below the video. In any case, like, comment and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and if you really appreciate what I'm doing, then I would be very happy about either a small donation using the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or to welcome you as a channel member, which is going to offer early access to new video before they are released for everyone else from business class membership and upwards, and in first class membership even the ability to request your own videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again hopefully very soon.